Greetings, the evaluation community. Once again, we're coming live from the city of gold, Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to Dialogue Conversations, where we explore different decolonial aspects in the different fields, such as evaluation, philanthropy, education, etc. I'm privileged today to welcome a good friend of mine, Dr. Khumalo, seated here. We're just going to have a conversation with her. Can you kindly introduce yourself to the evaluation family?
Hello, everyone, to the evaluation community. I'm excited to be part of these conversations today. I am Dr. Khumalo. I currently am a postdoctoral fellow working on decolonial thought in monitoring and evaluation based in Antwerp, Belgium, but happy to be here today in the City of Gold.
Awesome. It's been a while since we spoke to each other. I want you to tell the colleagues about your journey to the field of evaluation. How you started, how you were introduced to it. Because as you know, many of us come to this field from different angles. So what is your training and why were you interested in the field of evaluation?
Very good questions. So my training initially is in sociology. Actually, I studied sociology for my undergrad up to master's level, and I should have fallen in love with evaluation through research. So I started off as a field worker working on an evaluation project that was part of a consulting firm. And then I learned that evaluation was unique from research. So I started off not really being intentional about it. And so the grounding really came when I applied for an emerging evaluator / junior researcher position at the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, CLEAR. This must have been in 2016? 2015,
Yeah.
yes. So that was the dates quite way back. And that was an excellent opportunity, of course, because then I started understanding really where M&E fits and understanding it in a more systematic way. And there I worked as a researcher on a very specific program which looked at evidence use, so looking at evaluation use in parliaments, which I really found fascinating, and that's how I got more grounded into the space.
To the field. Oh, amazing. I know of the when she started at CLEAR because me and her started on the very first. I think it was June 2015.
Yeah.
The 1st of June 2015 when we joined the university together. And I think when you were at CLEAR, maybe you can share some bit about your interaction with how evidence could empower governments and then your observation, especially with parliamentarians, the work that you did when you were there, and the role of evidence, its linkage with evaluation. I think if maybe you can share a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so what I found was really valuable in our program was we often talk about evaluation in like national evaluation systems, and we look at like government departments and how evaluations are conducted. And we know that in the supply of evidence, as some call it, there is an ecosystem really that needs to lead to the policy. We talk about evidence-informed policy making, but I think what we found was a gap was how to make sure that those sides are communicating. So how to bring in the actual policymakers, and it was a difficult sort of terrain to tap into because first of all, parliamentary cycles are changing all the time. Like in our African context, every 5 years there's a new cycle and all of that. So what we did was to start to understand how to engage that youth side, like how to begin to talk about evaluations as something that is communicatable between the two. So the knowledge exchange that is like the researchers produce the evidence, but how does it get into a portable kind of format? And we started to find that there were more political elements of it. We spoke a lot about the politics of evidence. So what is that? So we spoke about how there are different incentives and disincentives for using information from research and especially information from evaluations, that when we produce in the utmost best interest of policy, it might not always lead to that.
Because of the politics behind
because of politics behind it. And so being able to look at it in a more systematic way, to say how do we influence evidence in a way that is not just training people, but trying to tap into how to make it more attractive, really, how to make evaluations attractive or easy to use and relevant. And this is where each context was different, and how to bring in different players. So not just working with members of parliament, but like the actual researchers, the knowledge brokers that exchanged the information that is produced with the members of parliament. So understanding it as an ecosystem rather than just different parts.
Yeah. And I do know that in that work, and I'm sure that's part of your launchpad towards being an editor of books. There was a book that was specifically trying to strengthen the parliament work. Can you talk just a little bit about the book and your contribution to the book before we move into the specifics of the Made in Africa evaluation?
You've called me an editor of books. Thank you. So evidence systems in parliament really was an initiative that started with us working again in different parliaments in East Africa, Southern Africa, and learning that there was so much that was not documented, right? That how exactly do parliaments work? We all talk about them as policymakers and producing all these policies, and that they need the evidence. But how that flow happens, who's involved, like I said earlier, that it's not so linear, and just having an opportunity to write with people in that space. So what we did in those, there was 2 volumes, was to be able to write with people that work in parliaments, like the researchers that work in parliaments, co-authoring with them, co-authoring with people that are doing similar work in think tanks that work around evidence use. So I think that was really, it has been quite significant up to today, the kind of findings that we were able to produce. And also coming up with a framework on what is this evidence in parliaments, because it's difficult to sort of codify it. What does it involve? Who are the players? How do they interact? And how does government come into play? How does civil society come into play? How do citizens come into play? So that, I think, was an important initiative, which continues, of course, needs to continue to be developed further. It's different. We had different case studies. I think that was what was groundbreaking in different parliaments, showing how different parliaments are using evidence, or what are the hindering factors to them using evidence, and finding that there is still a lot of colonial legacy in parliaments on how they make certain decisions, or how they present certain procedurals and all of that. And of course, this was important for me in my interest in what is an African approach and what are parliaments doing around that. And we found that is still, of course, lagging.
Tapping more into your last point around colonial culture in its tentacles around parliaments, I think it sort of lends us to the core of the conversation today around Made in Africa evaluation. I do know that you have been one of the guys who agitates for it, who writes around it, and I think the work that you are currently also involved in is linked to that. Can you tell us about your understanding of what it means for you and the scholarly work? As well as what intrigued you about it? Why do you think it's an important work? Especially because you are practicing outside of Africa. What is your lens to it? What does that mean, and how does that look like in the space where you are now?
Mm. Thanks for those deep, reflective questions. I think for me, it started even then as what we had called an emerging evaluator.
Yeah.
I remember very well a chapter that I was part of, which was called the AFRED book, which is
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
African Evaluation Database,
yeah.
where I was part of a chapter where we actually analyzed evaluations that are done in the African continent and what methods are being used. You know, just looking at the methods based on the evaluation reports was also alarming. I think we talk about it that we don't have enough innovative or African centered approaches, but then what exactly are we talking about? So for me, that scoping exercise was so important because it helped us to see and to really conclude with evidence that we are blind borrowing, that a lot of evaluation methods and huge projects, like even across different countries, are being conducted using the very same methods and not really anything innovative around the context, but just almost taking things as they are. And so an African approach, a made in Africa evaluation approach for me is thinking outside that box and thinking literally like, okay, for each context, it's not a standardized way of thinking, but it's for each context, what is the relevant approach for this African context? Why would it work better than this that we are so used to using, you know? And can we be able to apply it? So this, my current research is really moved from just looking at it as a made in Africa evaluation approach, but looking at indigenous knowledges,
Okay.
because I found this to be the specificity of it, to say, okay, so what does it look like? So it's embedded in indigenous ways of knowing, which is like how different cultural systems, how different local communities understand change, how they understand, might not be called development for them, but how they see themselves fitting into this ecosystem that we want to understand as social change. But what kind of ways of knowing do they use? And finding out that actually most of them are not packaged in journals is what has led to my new interest. Is like, how do we not try to take them and standardize them, but how do we make them known? If one of the challenges that literature points is that people do not really understand what are these alternative ways of knowing, what are these other methods in this made in Africa.
Given that backdrop, what is your observation in terms of, I wouldn't call it since the genesis of the idea, where do you think it is now? Is it gaining traction? Is it? I know it's evolving, and based from the European side of things, what is your experience? I mean, even in your teaching at the university, are you featuring in infusing this into the curriculum that's been offered? If yes, how has been the reaction to that type of an approach from your students?
I like the word evolving.
Yeah.
I think it's evolving. I think when we started, I say we because I mean we were not the ones that started the discourse, but when at the time that you and me were at CLEAR and engaging with these questions, it felt like it was a siloed approach that Africans were advocating, which is good. It needed to be that. But I think what is evolving is also that this conversation has also crossed the borders, right? So what I find interesting, which is what I was excited about my current postdoctoral project, was there was appetite, excitement from students who had not heard about this. They just didn't know that there was a Made in Africa evaluation approach, even students that are from African context. The department that I teach in has typically about 18 students represented from 18 countries, and usually about 80% is from Africa. So it was an opportunity definitely to bring it up. And students were asking me, what is this? But I think what I noticed they were struggling with is that how to apply it. Theoretically, I think we've made a lot of progress. But I think when you train students, these students are usually trained for practice, who are going into practice. They want me to give them a template. So this is where I have been a bit noticing that maybe we need to make it more tangible. Like, what is it, this approach? If they are to train and get their degrees, how do they apply it? Because it has been really good at like the philosophies of what it is, and the epistemologically what we need to think about, and why I think we are all sold on the value of it, but then they want to apply it. And this is where I think we are somehow in the research side trying to support the practice side.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even the criticism from elsewhere has always been that it's overly theoretical. We've philosophized enough, but then the how to, the guidelines on, I think that's a. But of course, for me, it's around whether it's possible that a complex phenomenon like the one we're discussing can be resolved within a fast-paced approach of doing it. Isn't it that this requires thinking and rethinking, learning and learning and learning, and relearning? Maybe that's something that I don't know what you think of that, because I also feel this pressure. It's a necessary pressure, but like in all other discourses, there must be a space for Africans and those who are advocates of this thinking to be given space to think correctly. What could be practically done to move the discourse forward? Because in some instances, there's some funding that's sort of allocated to ensure that its practicality gets to be. I don't know what's your comment in terms of that reflection.
I feel like research is not engaging enough with practice, and that's probably me making a case for my own research, so I might be biased. But that when you look at evaluation, there's not a lot of us that theorize, that come back to practitioners and have these kind of conversations to say, there's a bit of a block now. Like, we've done a lot of this. Like, for the indigenous knowledges aspect, we understand the legitimacy, understand the value, but then I think what's the challenge has been is like, in research we talk about integrating indigenous knowledges and evaluation, but when I talk to people that are actively conducting evaluations, they say, how? Like, exactly that. Like, how do you practically do that? This integration is very well and good, but again, it's like how to. I think we need more conversations with those theorizing and those on the ground, and like try to come up with these models of maybe trying out small cases of documenting people that have really tried to apply this in a very specific evaluation, and documenting that, and like letting that feed into the theory as well. So it's not just one-sided.
So
That could be one way of doing
one way.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think the dichotomy could be addressed through collaboration?
Yes.
And what I'm hearing also, you're suggesting that those who are commissioning evaluation consider experimenting with but that doesn't take away the fact that we need to be more practical in terms of the writing moving forward. And I do know that there's a project funded by Mastercard Foundation which was trying to really develop practical tools, around that. And I'm hoping that there will be a good reception from those frameworks. Talk to me about your project that I know you're working on. There's a book that you guys are editing. I think it covers this. What is the primary objective of the book, and who are you working with, and why?
Oh, thank you. So the book is really touching on this indigenous knowledges and evaluation, and looking at how these contestations between what we have called mainstream evaluation and indigenous knowledges are in practice, and how this shapes development outcomes. So what we're trying to do in the book is to address this gap where some scholars say that they don't see the indigenous knowledge in practice. So we have come up with a book where we have cases from different continents, the African context, Asia, and some Latin American cases, practical cases, where we see, for example, the use of proverbs, the use of the thought minga, which is another indigenous knowledge approach, and the use of a medicine wheel and some divination approaches. So, like cases again that show that we are beyond saying that there is no indigenous knowledge that are valuable. Like we need to move away from that, but start to legitimize and see their value and use them to inform development outcomes as opposed to sideline them. Like this idea of their othered knowledges. It's not other ways, but it's othered knowledges. So we need to bring them to the fore. And this requires a little bit of almost fighting for them to be, because I mean, we're fighting against a discourse that has been mainstreamed for very long. So it's not that we accept that we'll just present something and there will be an uptake and that we will see funders changing, but we want to change the situation. So we want this book to maybe we can, as the other thing that I would say is maybe we can already see the limitation that we might not package them. They are not all packageable in a book where, you know. So these are some of the limitations, but how else do we reach out to mainstream actors for change? So this is what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and then isn't it partly that you're answering the very same gap you raised earlier? You're trying to address the very same gap you raised earlier around the practicality of indigenous knowledge systems, that the book somewhat is contributing to some degree to addressing that gap of saying, because the medicine wheel and many other methods are really about how to apply a medicine wheel within the context of an evaluation, the field of evaluation.
Yes.
Yeah, I think partially it will contribute to that. But also the question on who are some of the authors, I understand they're from different continents, but there's also was intentionality from your side, colleagues around who's involved. I think I want us to speak to that. And why was that important?
Yeah, this was interesting from the beginning when we put out the call and we had said that we want indigenous authors. And I remember getting almost like flooded with what is an indigenous evaluator and all.
And then how did you answer that question?
So we answered it by that. First, there was the in-house joke with my co-editors that if you are questioning if you are indigenous, then probably you're not.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's also, we didn't want to limit it just to people that are indigenous in the sense of where they come from, but that people who have that philosophy where they believe in this way of knowing that is as legitimate. So it's more your value system.
Okay.
So we have authors that subscribe to a similar value system and that want to see this indigenous knowledge is brought to the fore, and that is an important part of it. And we were able to already ascertain that from the moment we started having conversations with these different people and what their intentions were, and of course reading through their chapter abstracts and working through their chapters has already shown that we are in different parts of the world, but we are advocating for this epistemic justice and wanting to see this translate, into equitable development outcomes and all that, so that we're on the same page with that.
Okay, that's good. And then when are you expecting to launch the book, or sort of go for printing so that people can expect the book? And what is the title of the book?
So these things keep changing.
Yeah, that's fine.
But 2026, that's where we are. We are sitting at the second revisions, so that's exciting. We have at least draft 0 loading. So we can at least promise the evaluation community that in the middle of next year, if all goes well, of course, we should have the book. The title keeps shifting.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but it will be something around the role of indigenous knowledges in evaluation and how they continue to shift epistemic inequalities in in like how we see development and how we assess its success. So that remains the focus.
Just before we approach the end, I know there was another paper that was talking, and I think it's linked to the question on who's an indigenous evaluator. The question on positionality. Talk to me about that paper and what was its intention, because I think it might also help to answer the question of who's an indigenous evaluator. Yeah.
I think this also started with like when we were talking about Made in Africa evaluation and some people feeling like they had to explain their Africanness, that they might not look like you and me, but they identify as African, or they identify with the struggles of being an African. And I think with the positionality piece as well, what we wanted to do was to bring in the different voices to show the diversity of this Made in Africa evaluation contributions. We might sit here today, but some of us come from different villages. We're not from Johannesburg. I mean, I am from Zimbabwe and I have lived in South Africa, and now I live in Europe. So those different spaces, how do they shape how I see the discourse? And again, I think it goes back to how we value it, even then in those different spaces. It doesn't shift that we are committed to that discourse, but maybe we begin to see it in different ways. So for me now, I begin to see that race is a very much big part of understanding evaluation in Europe. I cannot talk about it without talking about racial relations and living as a foreigner, but also being a Black woman is more defined than when I'm here as an evaluator sitting in South Africa. That might not be as pronounced, or might be pronounced in a different way. So I think declaring those positionalities, but also seeing them as strengths and almost embracing them and having different conversations with you as well from your different positionality and how we can find each other.
Interesting. And I think this personality, for me, it speaks to the fact that we as professionals are not innocent. We have our own biases.
Yes.
Even when you look at information and interpret it, this personality sometimes informs the way we look and view things. So we cannot distance ourselves from, and we must just be realistic about that and make sure that in terms of ethics, we disclose these things, and so that we're genuine. But I think overall, what would be some of the guides that you can recommend for people to read? And what do you wish for the discourse on IKS? I think we've broadened it from Made in Africa evaluation is almost a subset of indigenous knowledge systems. What is your wish for it, and looking into the future? And what are some of the people that you've been reading that have been quite helpful for maybe someone who's interested in reading about this field?
This is I think the important thing about this conversation and this book is also that the thing I should have said in your previous question, we wanted voices that we haven't, names we haven't seen. So I know that in Made in Africa evaluation, we've been guided by really big, good names like Chilisa that have led the discussion. But what we wanted in the book was also to see who are the emerging voices. So authors like yourselves, we want to hear from. We want to cite you. We want to. So it hasn't been that we have theorized from scratch. I'm not saying that, but then we have borrowed a lot from decolonial scholars who have been really central in helping to refine this idea of knowledge and epistemic justice, like your Gachenis, and looking at what does this really mean, like Minolo. So borrowing from those decolonial scholarships, but also trying to think about things in a like an innovative perspective, and definitely Made in Africa evaluation scholarship has been very instrumental. But I think what I'm also finding, especially having students from Latin America and Asia in my classes and also in this book, is that now I'm a little bit afraid to say Made in Africa, One of my evaluations last year was that I'm too Africa focused.
Mm.
So now I'm learning a bit more about what is the Latin American experience. We have a lot of experiences that actually we
Similar.
connect,
Yeah.
but then I feel like I lost people when I said made in Africa.
Yeah.
I had to almost give a disclaimer.
Okay.
So what I'm also working on the future you asked is how do I bring this, how do I continue these conversations without losing other parts.
And being inclusive.
Yes.
And that's why maybe some people like using global south, maybe for geographical reasons. But I think what you are saying,
Yes.
we need to widen the vocabulary of what we mean so that we're not inclusive. And that's why at times the question of who's indigenous
Exactly.
came to the fore, because
Yeah.
there's we might create an impression, unintentionally so, of exclusion, but I'm not saying where exclusions are necessary. We should shy away from that. But I'm saying we might run a risk of being exclusive, whereas we speak about social justice.
Exactly.
We speak of equity. So I hear your point. So are you saying that your work is to try and coin other vocabulary within to widen what does Made in Africa mean, an inclusive version of that?
That's what I'm trying to think of, like especially moving into the teaching. Like the teaching should somehow help inform the research. Like students from Latin America, they relate so well with it, but they want to know what is their approach. They ask me this. So I also want to connect, or we can connect, like moving in with these decolonial conversations with these scholars and these other contexts. It's good that we have our Made in Africa approach, but what can we share and those kind of things, I think, is the future.
Yeah, and I think maybe at the practicalities would bring the adaptability. Because then adaptability is that it could be adapted to different contexts, because given that it's sitting at the theoretical level, it is very difficult to identify it into their own philosopher. And so there are philosophers from Latin America who have been championing a similar discourse, but calling it differently. But I think when we're more practical, they can see the relatability of their language, and then they can choose to call it whatever it's want to be called. But I'm also careful that much as we want to be inclusive, we watch against compromising what we think is uniquely African.
Exactly. That's why I'm also a bit careful around it. So also I don't want to get to cooptation, which is already happening a lot with this decolonial discourse. So it's like a very I guess difficult line to tread. But we hope to do a bit of that in this book, because we have, like I say, diverse authors. We're still trying to see, and also not to just try to always compare things and try to not always find similarities, but like not lose those nuances and
So what are you going to be busy with? You're doing a book in 2026. What are your plans, and what are you looking forward to, and what else are you working on?
Oh yeah, so I am looking forward to getting the book complete or like reviewing the chapters, but I'm also busy trying to understand this relationship between indigenous knowledges and evaluation more in depth. So my current project is looking at how the integration happens, not just in theory, but in practice. So I actually want to spend time with evaluators, people on the ground here, while I'm here to see again these cases where this integration has been attempted. Has it succeeded? What are some of the constraints to this? The idea is to have a kind of a framework that helps to understand if integration in evaluation is practically happening, and if it's not, what are some of the components or factors that shape this I'm calling it integration, but it's not so linear. It's like, so I'm grappling, let me just rather say these are the things I'm grappling with for now, is very much focused on indigenous knowledges and evaluation and how this relationship is happening or not happening. So I am looking forward to engaging more with the evaluation community. What I want to do more this year again is to connect with practice. I feel this is the opportunity I have as a researcher,
Mm.
and having the past experience that we have,
Mm.
working in evaluation practice. I think
Mm.
that gives us really a unique opportunity
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to engage with each other, like research and practice. So I want
Mm.
to spend more time doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, good luck. Good luck with that. What is your parting words to the evaluation family? And now it's about December. It's a recess for Christmas and a New Year. What is your message to the colleagues? They might watch this next year whatsoever, but I think the message still remains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all really been pushing this year. I think it's been a difficult year for most of us for the evaluations phase. Some of us have lost hope, but I think the main message is like, let's keep pushing, let's not lose hope. I think together we can find a way forward. Evaluation is shifting, but it becomes ever more important to emphasize why we need each other, why we need the collective. So yeah, let's all have a great rest this festive season, but also not being so hard on ourselves for things that didn't happen, but looking forward to what we can shape together for 2026. Yeah.
No, thanks very much for your precious time. It was a family. It was quite an interesting conversation. I marvel and I'm full of joy to see my colleague doing such amazing work wherever she is. It is good and encouragement for me to see her doing such wonderful stuff. I wish you well and all
Thank
the
you.
best. Pass my regards to your family and your hubby. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode. God bless.